like to invite Dr. Todd Hubbard, Dr. Steve Marks, and Dr. Terry Salmon to kind of share a little bit about themselves and their project about course development.
The rest of my team is rather reluctant to come forward and talk about themselves. They really wanted me to talk about them so they could just sit where you're sitting and not be put on the spot. And they're still welcome to not have to say anything if they don't wish to. This particular project is kind of near and dear to my heart on course development because it is something that I certainly did at Mike Monroney for 8 years, developing courses. In fact, Janet Cope, who is on the team for the next project that I'll be describing, actually hired me in. And I was sitting around the table and was trying to get another guy a job, and she said, do you know anything about ISD? And I said, yeah, it's kind of boring. And she said, well, we have an ISD opening. Are you interested? So I said, okay. So, because I needed a job too. So I learned a lot from Janet, and I learned a lot about how the FAA approaches training. And however, in course development, where we find ourselves today is in a situation where course development in the past, in the traditional sense, could follow a very methodical approach to training because everything was set in stone, seems like anyway. It took a long time to develop a course, get it through its first course conduct, to evaluate whether or not it was going to work or not. We're now in a situation, particularly with Next Gen, that course development needs to be much more agile than it used to be. Now, I'm a little bit used to the agile side of things. One of the things that the FAA did, and I think there was a handshake somewhere behind closed doors on what I did on behalf of the OU contract with the FAA. If the FAA had a project that they wanted done and they wanted it done quickly, I would be invited to a conference room with only a couple people in the conference room, and I would sit there, not knowing exactly why I was there, and they would say, we have this course that we want to create, and we need it to be created quickly. We can't put it through the regular process because it would take too long. Here's the name of the course. Here is all the documentation. How long do you think it'll take you? And so then we would agree on how long it was going to take for me to field the course, and that's how we developed. Now, that was outside the normal way that the FAA would develop courses. Normally, it would go through a series of people, and it would take months and months and months to get through a course. So I do have experience in doing this more of an agile approach to instructional systems design. One of the things that we're going to have to do is to augment the typical instructional system design process with something called design research. And I think the next slide will help us out on that. The ISD process, ADDIE is a typical approach to ISD, ADDIE being to analyze, to develop your product, to design it, develop it, and then implement and evaluate. So you see here in the design research process that it's fairly similar. You see some of the same ideas, but it really follows a different path. If we'll click on this bottom hyperlink and see, hopefully it'll take us to a very ambitious slide. Now, on this slide, you will find all the different, probably stay close here, you'll find all the different design features that will track all the way across. Now, where the right now where the mouse is, right, it's kind of hiding. So let's just go over to conceptualize on the very top and just click on that. And what this does, this one particular slide, gives you all the different possibilities for design research. Design research is different from the scientific method from Newton. It has a different theoretical basis. It is much more imaginative much more artsy in the approach for training. But this is exactly what's going to be needed for course development for next gen, is more of an artsy approach. When we talk about gamification, I think a lot of people use the term but don't fully understand what it takes to create a game. And all of the infrastructure of that game that's absolutely necessary, and that from an educator point of view, we have to be very specific on what it is, what is our intent, what is our objective, and yet not to be so much of a stick in the mud that we create a very difficult process to create the game. Those who will in future take courses on their iPad or look at part task kinds of things, which is what I'm going to talk to next, will actually be doing games and achieving different levels in their games that are really based on some pretty solid educational objectives, but will be quite hidden to the person that's actually doing the game, which is, of course, what we want to have happen. But we need to understand that when we talk about gamification, we're not talking about something that we just plug in a few numbers and we're done. There's going to have to be an awful lot of stuff being done on the other side of the game to make sure that it's vital and viable. So for those of you that like to look at different design features, memorize this URL because it's absolutely brilliant. You can mouse over any of these design research functions down below, and like, for example, April, come down to business model canvas. There we go. So for every one of these, there's just a little explanation of what it is, and of course it has its own little universe as well. But if you're a researcher, this is a wonderful place to go to find out to find ideas for research design. Okay, so that more or less describes the newer approach, and then I want to go back to the slide again to make sure that I've covered everything. As the description says here, there are some objectives that we have: examination of current course development protocols, examination of the current use of the ELMS, so the Learning Management System for course development, creation of a modified ISD protocol that uses design research features compatible with next-gen courses, and so on. You can read it. You have that in front of you, I believe, and obviously you can see it on the slide. What all that says, if you're not used to all of what I just mentioned, first of all, I discovered that there is a learning management system that the FAA uses. It's probably underutilized. For those of us in academe, we probably all have learning management systems that our universities use. Right now, we're migrating at OU from Desire to Learn to Canvas. They function pretty similarly, except that Canvas can be app-driven. So now, by downloading an app, our students can do a lot of things on their iPads and other tablets that they weren't able to do before. So that's one of the modifications, which sounds very much like the direction that we need to go in the FAA for the next-gen training, is to have a series of apps that you can download that will help you to learn your job better or to stay practiced, because you don't always practice everything on the job every time that you're on the job. So it'd be nice to make sure that you stay engaged. And I heard somebody say the other day that one of the things that they're hoping will happen is that air traffic controllers that are not actively controlling airplanes that are in the break room might open up one of these apps. I think it's kind of wishful thinking, but might open up one of these apps just to play the game. It all sounds great. I'm not sure that's what they're going to do. So unless we create a wonderful app to do that. Now, the other members of my team, certainly Dr. Marks, who, by the way, is, I don't want to embarrass him, but he was the chair of my dissertation committee, so for me it's a privilege to have my chair here at this function and also to be co-PI with him. It's a great honor for me to be a co-PI. Terry Selman and I were grad students together going through our doctoral studies together, so I've known Terry for a number of years, and again, brilliant individual, and I'm really happy that he's on the team as well. Gents, is there anything you want to say?
Thank you, Todd. You mentioned I was Todd's committee chair. I was wondering who's in charge of the committee, but that's okay. As you know, Todd, he's wonderful, and how gratifying for an educator to have their students do things like they're doing here. It's really grateful, and to far exceed my capabilities, they have done that. At Oklahoma State, we have been big on NASA education nationwide, and so what we have done the last year is modified some of NASA's curriculum. And using some of the techniques that Todd and us will be using on our group, using our existing management system, we ran with NASA Education, most of it's volunteer stuff. In Texas, they get credit for 1 year of science if they complete this curriculum. As volunteer, our retention rate in just redesigning using some of these techniques, not all, just some, went from 38% to 86% retention. And so if you look at what we're trying to do in the Center of Excellence, we have good base work that, and hopefully we'll achieve pretty close to these results. So thanks, Todd, for leading this and putting these ideas in.
And I'm Terry Salmon. What we're bringing to the table with computer system designers is kind of what I would think a realistic approach to the training side of it. And what I mean by that is in developing all of the courseware that's being talked about, the ideal thing is to make sure that the students are able to actually use it. And so the work that we're doing with the distance learning group with the FAA, one of the things is making sure that, first of all, you're saving some travel dollars. That's one thing that the FAA is really trying to do. So they're using a lot of computer-based training. The other side of that is we have to realize that everybody, and Todd kind of alluded to this, especially the air traffic controllers, don't have a lot of time to just sit around and take training. So it has to be efficient training. And part of that is, believe it or not, when they're not on the boards, there's not a computer around. So they can't take that training all the time. So we have to take that in consideration whenever those things come up. The other thing is there's another group of tech ops, and there are radar sites out there all across the country sitting on the side of mountains, and they don't even have internet connection. So that's why the group that we're working with, they have about 2,500 computers across the country that still are able to get training, and we still use, in some cases, DVDs, so that if there's no connectivity, we can put that course on those DVDs and they can still run it, get the training, and then upload it to their management system later. So we have to kind of take all of those things and put them together as we're putting our training together for the realistic situations that are out there. And that's what I think our team will bring together as we try and develop the courses. Does it work in all of the different scenarios that are out there?